Is the lost sarcophagus of Alexander the Great kept in full public view in London? In order to examine whether or not this is the case, we must look to another military genius, although one who lived many centuries after the Macedonian conqueror. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte captured the Egyptian city of Alexandria. Following this, after the Battle of Alexandria in 1801, his forces surrendered to the British and handed over various antiquities they had gathered, including the famous Rosetta Stone and a 7-ton sarcophagus covered in hieroglyphics. Shortly after the British took possession of these items, locals approached them, suggesting that the sarcophagus might be the tomb of Alexander the Great. The enormous stone funerary item was then taken to London, where it remains on display at the British Museum. For a time, many believed the tomb belonged to Alexander. So let's look at the evidence. Is the former sarcophagus of Alexander the Great in this place, the British Museum in London? After the Rosetta Stone's hieroglyphics were deciphered, scholars realised the tomb had not been intended for Alexander. The inscriptions, taken from the Book of What is in the Underworld, contained the cartouche of Nectanebo II. This suggested that the tomb was at least created for Nectanebo, who likely never used it, as he fled to Nubia after being overthrown. Some have argued, however, that the sarcophagus may still have housed Alexander's remains at one point. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, his body was temporarily entombed in Memphis, where Saqqara is a proposed site for his resting place. Nectanebo had built a temple there, possibly as his own burial site, which might have been vacant at the time of Alexander's interment. When Alexander's body was later moved to Alexandria in 280 BC, the sarcophagus could have accompanied it. In 2020, an article in the Egyptology journal KMT by Andrew Chugg proposed new support for this theory, showing that a 3rd century BC fragment from a high-status Macedonian tomb, discovered in 1960 in the foundation of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, matches the tomb casing of this sarcophagus, renewing claims it may once have held Alexander's remains. As an interesting aside, when Napoleon's forces found the sarcophagus in the Atarine Mosque, built on the site of a former church dedicated to Athanasius of Alexandria, they observed holes drilled into it, indicating it had been repurposed as a ritual bath during Alexandria's Islamic period. But before Napoleon, and before the sarcophagus was repurposed as a bath, was it the repository of Alexander's remains? Was there another connection between the Macedonian monarch and the Egyptian pharaoh? An ancient legend says there was. The story, which circulated widely in the Greco-Roman and medieval worlds, imagines Alexander as the secret son of Nectanebo, linking him to both the Macedonian and Egyptian royal lines. According to legend, Nectanebo II, the last Egyptian pharaoh, fled to Macedonia after being overthrown by the Persians around 343 BC. In Macedonia, he took on the guise of a magician and astrologer. Meanwhile, Philip II of Macedon and his wife, Queen Olympias, were anxious for an heir. In one version of the legend, Nectanebo used his knowledge of the stars to convince Olympias that the Egyptian god Ammon would visit her in a dream to grant her a son of divine lineage. Nectanebo, thus in the guise of Ammon, visited her and claimed he would father a child who would be destined to rule a vast empire. This child, Alexander, was therefore believed to be of both royal and divine Egyptian lineage. When Alexander was born, Nectanebo prophesied his greatness before vanishing, leaving his son to be raised by Philip and Olympias. The story emphasizes Alexander's alleged dual heritage, Macedonian by birth and Egyptian by divine right. This legitimized his future rule over Egypt in the eyes of Egyptians. The connection to Nectanebo also suggested continuity of Egyptian kingship, subtly positioning Alexander as a restorer of Egypt's lost greatness. The legend appeared in various medieval texts, including the Alexander Romance, which was especially popular in both the Greek and Arabic-speaking worlds. It enhanced Alexander's mystique and suggested that his conquests had a predetermined, almost divine aspect. The myth also helped cement Alexander's acceptance as a legitimate pharaoh when he conquered Egypt in 332 BC, as he became associated with both local tradition and popular myth. The story contributed to Alexander's semi-divine status and has influenced literature, art and historical accounts across cultures. It remains a compelling example of how myths can reinforce political authority and how narratives of divine parentage have been used to elevate rulers throughout history. But was the legend true? Well, sadly, probably not. It has no basis in historical fact, with no evidence of Alexander being sired by the pharaoh. Nectanebo II was indeed the last native Egyptian pharaoh, overthrown by the Persians in 343 BC. But after he fled, he likely went to Nubia or to southern regions of Egypt where he could retain some support, not to distant Macedonia as the legend suggests. There is no historical evidence or record of him fleeing to Macedonia. Historical sources agree that Alexander was indeed the son of Philip II of Macedon and Olympias, both of whom were deeply involved in his life. Alexander's Macedonian lineage was essential to his identity, and he was known to have had a complex relationship with Philip, whom he revered and often sought to emulate. And Philip's military success paved the way for Alexander's incredible expansion of Macedonia's empire. There is no credible historical evidence or even suggestion from contemporaneous sources that Philip was not Alexander's father. As mentioned, this myth likely developed after Alexander's conquest of Egypt in 332 BC, as a means to legitimize his rule by linking him to Egypt's last native ruler. But this could actually strengthen the possibility of Alexander being interred, at least temporarily, in the sarcophagus. It may have made sense, both for convenience and political purposes, to have put Alexander's mortal remains in Nectanebo II's sarcophagus. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and most importantly subscribe. And you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description, or via YouTube Super Thanks. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.